Welcome back. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. We're taking your calls at 855-236-3228, 855-236-3228. Maxwell in New York, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Maxwell.
So my question has to do with actually my wife. My wife's a pediatrician here in New York, and it seems like every day she comes home and talks about another kid who's either attempted suicide or actually successfully committed suicide. And she also discusses about how many of her patients are missing appointments for medical visits, and they're really causing adverse effects. I have heard that your wife is also a medical professional. I would not be surprised if she also comes home telling you stories of this as well. I'm just wondering, how come no one's talking about this?
Well, to talk about the various costs of shutdown would, of course, be anti-science. That's the way this is posited by the media. If you talk about the fact that there will be higher suicide rates as a result of a bad economy, and by the way, when you're talking about teenagers, social isolation, which is not good for anybody. If you talk about the fact that there are people who are losing their incomes and their livelihoods, and that's going to lead to depths of despair over time, then this is ignoring the science. If you talk about the fact that there is a study out from the Associated Press saying that virus-linked hunger has been tied to 10,000 child deaths each month, that as the economy downturns and less trade goes on, that what you are seeing is a shortage of food in places of the area that are desperately poor, then that is apparently unworthy of comment. You know, all that stuff is unworthy of comment according to many in the mainstream media. And there's been some good research that shows that there is likely to be a pretty large surge for suicide. And this is not just in the United States, that there's going to be a suicide surge internationally as well. There was during the Spanish flu too. So my wife has been on she's been on maternity leave because we had a baby like 1 week before COVID hit the shutdown. But the stats are coming in, and they are very ugly. There will be significant social costs and cost to life if the shutdowns continue this way, which is why I've been saying socially distance, wear a mask, and let's try and get people back to work, particularly if they don't have pre-existing conditions. We have to open the schools again. We should be responsible in how we do this. None of this should be all that controversial, but the media have drawn a false binary between we have to shut everything in the world down and we have to open everything in the world up. And unfortunately, I think too many folks on the right have bought into that as well, saying, okay, well, basically everything is fine. No masks, no social distancing, enjoy yourself. I don't think most people feel that way. I think most people are pretty unified on this. And you can see it in how people act. People shut down before the shutdowns. People started wearing masks before the mask wearing mandates went out.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why, like Trump and Betsy DeVos, for example, don't actually push this also as a narrative as why kids need to go back to school.
I mean, I think that she has talked about this. I think she's talked about, the emotional problems. Listen, I know a lot of parents who have kids who have, mild emotional issues, and they really need to be with other kids. Like I know parents who have kids with conditions like autism, and social isolation is not good for those kids. I mean, it's really not. I mean, I know too many kids who suffer from conditions that are really exacerbated. They see real regression in terms of their ability to deal with mental and social conditions if they're isolated. And that needs to be part of the conversation, especially when you're talking about risk to small children that effectually does not exist. I mean, there is no risk to small children from this disease on a statistical level. You're talking about death rates among small children in the double digits in a country that's had something like 400,000 infections among small children. So, all of that should be on the table. But the media wish to push forward a particular view, and that view is basically that if you want to open the schools, you want to kill kids, which is utterly insane and not backed by the data, Maxwell. Really appreciate the call. Ethan in Louisiana, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Ethan.
I had a quick question. I am a 22-year-old male, and, the biggest struggle I'm having with a lot of people in my generation is the fact that they're undereducated and they don't do their research on history. I'm a right-wing conservative. One, I do mostly everything you talk about I agree with, especially, debunking a lot of the left liberal, how would you say, I mean, they'll say something to you, and then by the time you're done talking to them, their jaw will be to the floor. Yep. That's just facts. What is the best thing that I can do to educate them in regards to, hey, Joe Biden's president, we need this free, we need that free, we need that free. First of all, nothing is free in this country.
Right.
It's either paid for by taxes. They already want to redistribute wealth. I'm personally a first responder. So I see, you've got these Black Lives Matter groups. First of all, to me, color, race, religion, sexuality, none of that matters. I have to remain impartial and then I get backlash. Well, why don't you support this? Why? Well, but going back to my original question, what is the best way I can educate people in regards to just not knowing?
Well, when it comes to this election, you're facing two obstacles. One is lack of knowledge about Biden, and the other is a perception of Trump. And that's very difficult. I mean, the latter one is probably the harder one. Lack of knowledge about Biden can be fixed by simply going through the platform. And Biden has said he's going to raise regulations. Biden has said that he is going to significantly undermine the economy through really heavy increases, taxation increases. He has said that he wants to regulate how businesses can operate. None of that is good for the economy, and most economists sort of agree with that. I mean, the fact is that until COVID hit, the economy is the best that it's been in American history. Until COVID hit, we had record low unemployment. We had a 50-year high in terms of employment and in economic performance. That's pretty good. I mean, that was all good. Biden takes precisely the opposite viewpoint. So it's not too hard to debunk Biden's platform. The problem is people feel non-threatened by Biden because Biden is inherently sort of a non-threatening creature. He's sort of just a political swamp thing. And people don't feel threatened by him. I mean, he's kind of senile. He's elderly. He doesn't seem like he's going to come after you in any real way. And you juxtapose that with Trump, who appears to be extraordinarily volatile, and people just have this sort of innate reaction to Trump on a personal level that is very difficult to overcome. And the point to make about Trump is that, yeah, Trump does a lot of stuff. He says a lot of crap, tweets a lot of things. But how much of that translates into policy, and how much of his policy is actually good? And the answer there is that the policy generally is pretty good. Right? When it comes to the economy, there's no question Trump has said many different conflicting things. But when it came to the economy was soaring up until COVID. When it comes to the treatment of COVID, the administration has provided all of the various Democratic governors what they need. They have said this themselves. So yeah, Trump says dumb things sometimes about COVID. That doesn't mean that what the administration actually does is dumb. So what you actually have to defend is the constitutional boundaries that hem in the sillinesses of various presidents, not restricted to President Trump. That's a bit of a hard pitch because people tend to vote for people. They don't tend to vote for policies. If this were just a policy battle, I think Republicans would almost innately have an edge. But unfortunately, this is not a policy battle. So that means that, as I've said many times, the art of politics is about making it hard to vote for your opponent and easy to vote for you. Trump is fairly good at the first, and he is awful at the second. If you are a backer of President Trump, then the burden then falls on you to make it easier to vote for Trump. And it seems to me the easiest way to get people to vote for Trump is to recognize that voting for Trump doesn't mean voting for all of his various excesses and sillinesses. It means voting for him as a bulwark against the excesses and craziness of a radical left.
I hope I'm not taking up too much time here.
No, go for it.
Now going back and looking at all the things that the left has done while Trump was in the White House. Primarily, I have never ever watched a State of the Union. I think he had one in January. I was appalled looking at the left side in regards to everything. I mean, Nancy Pelosi just tore up his entire, I guess you call it manifesto, speech, whatever it's called. I think I'm more just full of opinions or anything like that, but to me, that's just un-American. I've seen more.
Yeah, I mean, again, this all comes down. So much of this comes down to just pure personal hatred of Trump, which means he has to make it easier for people to like him and easier for people to rally around him. So I agree with you that when she rips up a speech that talks about record low black unemployment, for example, that's not a good look. But the mainstream media portrayed that as she just doesn't like Trump. And when she says everything in there was a lie, instead of saying, okay, so which things were the lies? Instead, the media just says, yeah, because Trump's a bad orange man. And that is, again, why it comes down so much to Trump's personality. He really needs to hem himself in. And people who support him need to make the case that personality foibles do not mean bad president, which I think is a plausible case to make. I mean, Bill Clinton was filled with personality foibles. The left still loves the dude. So, Ethan, appreciate the call. Dominic in Colorado, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Dominic.
Hey, how's it going? So my question is on education, because I think it is the most integral part of a healthy society, and I feel like it doesn't really get enough attention. But first, I'd like people to know that they should research Elijah McClain, because that was like one of the most scariest things I've ever seen. But so for a public education system, there's an issue with our schools, like area code funding, like keeping poor people in worse schools, teaching for tests and not for conceptual understanding, not requiring classes like philosophy or ethics or emotional intelligence, the textbooks problems, the history books problems, all that stuff. Then I look at countries like South Korea with very cheap public education. They have a cultural respect for teachers. Students are disciplined. They do their own dishes after lunch. European countries, New Zealand, Singapore, all have great systems. So if education is locally funded and it's not primarily federally funded, how come we can't succeed like a European country or South Korea? Like, how do you see a realistic way forward to fixing our schools? And how can we adopt what works elsewhere and what can't we adopt? I mean, just because it's America?
So the reality is that we can adopt most of the policies that have been attempted in various places around the world. I really don't think that our public school system is inherently problematic in terms of the spending. We have a few things that are wrong with our public school system. One is we have incentive structures that mean that as you become more senior in your union, you get to move to a nicer school, which it should be precisely the opposite. We should have incentive-based programs where if you're going into a school with kids who have more educational difficulties, you should be paid more for that, right? If you're teaching in Beverly Hills, actually you should be paid less than if you're teaching in South Central Los Angeles, because one is an easy school to teach at, the other is very difficult to teach at, given the prevailing socioeconomic circumstances. That's issue number one. The bigger issue is that when it comes to education, this has always been true. The reason that schools are good is because the people who go to the schools care deeply about education. This is why America has the best college system on planet Earth, but does not have a good public education system below that, because people who go to college are self-selected. They're people who value education. They're willing to spend money on education. And so to compare colleges to high schools and junior highs and elementary schools in the United States doesn't really, you're comparing sort of apples to oranges because of the self-selection process. The same thing holds true of private schools versus public schools. Private schools outperform public schools. Part of that is obviously the people who are going to private school happen to be richer, but also it's because people who are going to public school in some cases are not particularly rich, and they're on scholarship, and their parents have decided to dedicate a significant portion of their income to making sure their kids get a good education. So the biggest imbalances in the educational system have to do with exactly the sort of value systems that you're talking about. And again, this is not based on color. There are real problems with this in white Appalachia, for example. Appalachia, this is what J.D. Vance talks about in Hillbilly Elegy. This exists in a variety of communities. Koreans in America do really, really well in school. Koreans in Korea do really, really well in school. Right? Jews in Europe do really, really well in school. Jews in America do really, really well in school. Norwegians do really well in school in the United States. They do really well in Norway. The idea that culture has nothing to do with the adoption of various attitudes toward education, it's just there's no evidence to back that. So just tossing money at the problem really isn't going to fix it. You can provide educational opportunity where people who want to self-select out of crappy public schools and be surrounded by people who value education, that would be great, right? That's what school vouchers would be for. That is what school choice would be for. Charter schools, right? There are a million kids waiting in line to get into charter schools, and simultaneously, Democrats are trying to shut down charter schools across the country, right? That's a disaster area. So there are certain things we can do to allow people to self-select out of schools where not enough kids or parents take education seriously. That's the least we can do. But on a broad level, if you want to help the education system, there needs to be a differential value put on education in particularly dispossessed communities that historically have not done particularly well in the educational sphere.
Yeah, okay, I agree with you. And the tier system is terrible also because it's similar to the military system, where it's like the longer you stay in, the more, pieces of paper you get, the higher you move up. It's not based off of like actual data, like how good your students do that year and how good your students do next year. We should definitely use data for that. But so yeah, I guess that's the pickle I'm in is I know we have enough money. That's not the problem. There's a lot of administration and bureaucracy, obviously, that is muddling that stuff. But I guess, yeah, the biggest issue I guess I have is like I didn't care about school. Well, I didn't care about my education until after high school. So after high school, I taught myself physics and quantum physics and started learning about philosophy and like doing a lot of reading and actually like educating and caring about actual knowledge. And but then when I study other school systems, it seems like they, like you said, a cultural reason. So why doesn't government? I guess it's a question with government. Like the same thing with coronavirus. Instead of saying like we need to be healthier people, fix your diet, do zinc, and instead of like healthcare systems being preventative, and instead of
I'm not sure how much of this is, honestly, Dominic, I'm not sure how much of this is governmental.
People to like education.
But I really am not sure how much of this can be solved by government. The United States in 2015, the United States spent about $13,000 per student across the United States on elementary and secondary education. In the OECD, which are sort of the advanced countries, the country average is $9,500. So we are spending a lot of money on education in this country. The lie that America is underspending, that's just not true. Dominic, appreciate the call. We'll take more of your phone calls in just one moment at 855-236-3228. That's 855-236-3228. This is The Ben Shapiro Show.